Democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education. Democracies across the world are full of charismatic leaders who deceive the masses with their populist schemes. At the end, the people are the ones who pay the cost of the decisions taken by such leaders. Sri Lanka has turned into such an example.
Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has submitted his resignation to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa ensuing hours of political unrest and dissent in the island capital Colombo. The biggest conflict following Sri Lanka's worst economic crisis, the supporters of Mahinda Rajapaksa brutally assaulted peaceful protesters outside Mahinda Rajapaksa's Temple Reach residence and then at the main protest site at Calface Bay. The protesters retaliated by setting the houses of various lawmakers belonging to the ruling party ablaze. MP of the ruling party opened fire with two people after they tried to storm his car. He was later found dead after trying to take refuge in a nearby building, the Sri Lankan police said. The ancestral home of the Rajapaksas and a controversial memorial monument of the Rajapaksa clan was set on fire. The Prime Minister's official residence, Temple Trees, was stormed by a mob before Rajapaksa and his family was evacuated. A state of emergency has been set in motion and a curfew has been imposed throughout the island. Sri Lanka is at the verge of bankruptcy, with foreign debts accounting to $51 billion. The nation's foreign reserves stood at a mere $1.93 billion at the end of March, and usable foreign reserves stood at a negligible $50 million. This has caused unprecedented levels of inflation, shortage of medicinal supplies, never-ending queues outside convenience stores, and innumerable power blackouts. Value of Sri Lankan rupee is steadily declining. It dipped to as low as 359 Sri Lankan rupee for $1. Numerous protests ensued throughout the nation, urging the incumbent Rajapaksa government to resign. This political and economic turmoil is the culmination of a series of mistakes by the government that has caused the greatest economic recession since its independence from Britain. Tourism sector is a major revenue maker for the island and contributes almost 12% of Sri Lanka's economy. The East bombings in 2019 and COVID-19 pandemic took a big blow on the tourism sector and severely lessened the government's revenue. Tourism revenues were estimated to have fallen to $956 million in 2020 from $3.6 billion in 2018, hurting over 300,000 said to be connected to the industry. Sri Lanka welcomed the highest number of tourists in 2018 with 2.1 million arrivals, which dipped to 1.9 million following the Easter Day bombings in April 2019. The data released by Sri Lankan Tourism Development Authority (SLTDA) revealed that Sri Lanka's tourists fell by 70.8% to 71,370 in March 2020. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, imports modeled exports. It has a trade deficit worth $1,080 million. meaning it owes to other countries more than other countries owe to it. This adds to the overall depth of Sri Lanka. An extremely small foreign reserves means that the island does not have enough money to import goods from other countries, and hence the supply of several basic commodities has severely lessened. Whenever the demand is higher than the supply, it leads to inflation. The prices of essentials are hyperinflated. According to the data published by the Government Census and Statistics Office, the overall inflation hit 29.8% in April from 18.7% recorded in March. The food inflation reached a record high of 46.6% in April from 30.21% in March. It is by this time that the campaigning for the 2019 presidential election had begun. In his campaign speeches, Rajapaksa promised deep tax cuts, which triggered his victory in the election. In November 2019, newly elected President Gotabaya Rajapaksa approved mandate to abolish taxes such as PAYE, NDT, withholding tax, capital gain tax, bank debit tax, and to reduce VAT tax from 15% to 8%. Indirect taxes such as value added tax or VAT accounts for 71% of the government's total revenue. These tax cuts hurt the Sri Lankan economy adversely and drastically shortened the government's revenue. These tax cuts lost roughly $1.4 billion to the government. The Rajapaksas also chose populist and debt-fueled welfare over structural reform and good governance. They decided to please the people with immediate welfare measures instead of focusing on long-term economic development. The island borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars from state-owned Chinese banks as investment loans as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, an ambitious trillion-dollar initiative by the Chinese government, which makes large-scale loans available to countries aspiring to improve their infrastructure. It is a daring move by China to assert its dominance in South Asia, especially near India. Over the last decade, Sri Lanka amassed a debt of $5 billion to China alone, making up a large portion of its overall foreign debt, according to the New York Times. Many critics suggest that it is China's debt-trap diplomacy. The country would offer huge loans to countries to improve their infrastructure, and when the countries fail to repay the loan, China would confiscate the assets and thus increasing its political and economic influence over the nation. A very good example of this is the Hambantota International Port. The Hambantota International Port is the second largest port in Sri Lanka. It made a profit of $1.8 billion but was deemed economically unviable. So the newly elected government decided to privatize it. Among the bidders, the Chinese Merchants Port won the bid. In an agreement made in 2017, the Chinese Merchants Port was handed over 70% stake and a 99% lease was granted to the company. To top it all off, in an instantaneous and unanticipated move, the Sri Lankan government decided to ban all fertilizers. The president justified it by stating that it is to improve public health and to cut down on imports of fertilizers and to save foreign reserves. However, the ban minimized agricultural productivity and was ensued by a dramatic fall in yields, as crops like rice and tea are heavily dependent on fertilizers. Sri Lanka was a vital exporter of tea and rice, but this ban pushed Sri Lanka into importing rice and tea, which has never been done in the country's history. Tea makes up about 10% of Sri Lanka's total exports, bringing in about $1.2 billion a year. A survey revealed that 85% of farmers feared that their harvest will be reduced because of the ban, and half of them feared that the yields will be cut down by 40%. The ban was later partially lifted by the government in response to massive protests by farmers and soaring prices of everyday items. But this sudden disruption affected nearly 2 million farmers said to be connected with. It plunged the already tottering economy into the verge of collapse. India has extended near $3 billion to its island neighbor in the form of currency swaps, credit lines for essentials, and loan postponements to lend a helping hand to Sri Lanka to contain its worst economic crisis. Around 1,600 megatons of rice and fuel have been dispatched to Sri Lanka. India has extended its current credit line by a further $200 million to replenish its fuel stocks, power, and energy. India has also postponed payments worth $1.5 million that Sri Lanka is debted to the Asian Clearing Union. The Sri Lankan government is also holding talks with the International Monetary Fund for a bailout plan. China has offered a loan of 300 million yuan to Sri Lanka. The total amount of emergency grants provided by China has increased to 500 million Chinese yuan. A state of emergency was declared by President Rajapaksa on April 1st, but was repealed as multitudes of ministers fled the cabinet in protest. President Rajapaksa has announced that a national council will be appointed to name the new Prime Minister and to form an all-party government. Ranil Wickremesinghe is appointed as the new Prime Minister. The government earlier reshuffled the cabinet and offered a unity government, but was rejected by the opposition, who stated that they will not join a government headed by the Rajapaksa clan. No conference motion has been put forward by the key opposition party SJB, both against the government and the Prime Minister. MK Stalin has announced that 40,000 tons of rice, 500 tons of milk powder and medicaments will be dispatched to cash-strapped Sri Lanka. The DMK will also be donating 1 crore towards humanitarian aid that will be sent to Sri Lanka. The ruling party's MLAs have offered to stump up their 1 month salary to the CMPRF. Once a heaven for European tourists and an island famous for its rich biodiversity and stunning natural wonders has descended into violence and chaos. For average Sri Lankan, there is no other choice but to suffer the evils of the leaders they voted for.